Hello, crafty friends. This is Teresa, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm very excited to be doing my first design team post with So Susie stamps for their September release. And there are a lot of exciting stamps in this release, and I'm going to show you how I put together this fun snowman card. As I'm starting out, I'm actually going to recreate the card that I created before, just because I learned a few things along the way. So to create the snowbank, I'm going to use texture paste and apply it to a piece of plastic that I've cut into the general shape of the snowbank. I'm using temporary adhesive to attach it to a piece of copy paper just so it'll stay there while I'm applying the paste. And as you can see, I'm not really spreading it as much as I'm at least spreading it enough to get it to stick to the plastic, and then kind of tapping it in order to get some good texture going on this. And once this is done, I'm going to set it aside to dry. It took pretty much overnight, I think, to dry very solidly, but it could dry in a few hours. This is one of those things you just kind of have to come back and keep checking on. And if you find you've missed some spots, you can always come back and fill them in later. Moving on to stamping the snowman, stamping the background, I'm going to temporarily adhere my piece of 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 piece of white cardstock to my MISTI. And then I'm going to use a template that I had done before filming this video. I used this piece of plastic in order to give myself a plan on how I was going to stamp the 3 different sizes of snowflakes. Because I was using Versamark ink on a white background, it's really difficult to see that when you're stamping, and it can be very easy to overlap where you're stamping. So as you can see, I'm just kind of shifting the stamp positions around, and I'm simulating what I did when I created the template and drew those lines with the black marker. So now that I'm getting ready to actually do the stamping, I open the door of the MISTI, and I'm going to place the stamps in a position to start with. I'm going to treat the cardstock with my embossing buddy and move on to inking up the stamps with Versamark, stamping that down, and once I'm done that, I'll just keep moving, repositioning the stamps in different places as per the template until I have stamped in all the pre-marked locations. This is a technique you could use whenever you want to do any repetitive stamping, or if you want to do mass production and keep things very consistent from one background to the next. And now I'll add some white heat embossing powder onto my panel and tap off the excess before heat setting it, and then move on to the fun part of the project, which is creating the background. For the background, I'm using 3 different shades of blue Distress Oxide, including Salty Ocean, Broken China, and Faded Jeans for all the blue hues. So as you can see, I just put down some color all over the card, and then just went back over it with the different colors and started gradually blending it in to get my background effect so that it's not all one shade of blue. So I just keep picking up the colors and going back over it until I'm satisfied with the result I'm getting. And the final phase of this is I will add a little bit of black soot around the edges in order to give it a little bit of a framing effect or a silhouette. So what I want to do is just barely get the edges of this colored, and so I started on the mat at first to take off some of the color before coming onto the edges of the card. And I decided as I got around the whole card that there were a couple of places where I went in a little bit further than I was planning to do, so I decided to go back and fix that by just picking up one of the other ink blenders and blending some more blue ink over those edges. And in order to make sure that you could see the white of the snowflakes, I went back and wiped over it with a paper towel in order to remove any ink that was on top of the embossing powder. So now, moving on to the snowman, because I'm planning to color with Copic markers, I'm using black Memento ink, which is a Copic safe ink. And just because I like to plan ahead, I'm inking up the snowman twice just in case the coloring gets messed up the first time. I can always start over and get it done better the next time. Since I've got the MISTI out, I decided to go ahead and stamp the sentiment. I'm using vellum to stamp that on, and I'm using Versamark. And I'll follow that up by using white detailed embossing powder, and I'll heat set that. And it looks like I did get that on a little bit crooked, so I'll have to come back and trim that up, but not a big problem. That's why I use a bigger piece of vellum than's necessary in case I have to correct for those things. So now I'm moving on to the coloring vase, and I have a variety of different alcohol markers in my collection. Most of the ones I'm using for this video are Copic markers, but I did use a couple of Spectrum Noir markers for those cases where I didn't have the colors I needed from the Copic. But because they're all alcohol markers, they play together just fine, so it really doesn't matter what brand you're using. As long as you have the color that you're after, all alcohol ink markers will blend together just fine. While I finish the coloring part, I'll play a little bit of music. And after doing the coloring, I used my brother's ScanNCut to die cut the snowman out. And now I'm going to trim the sentiment so that it's a little bit straighter than from before. And I'm using a corner rounder because I wanted a softer shape to the sentiment. And I did decide to go back and add some snowflake stamps to the corners just to add a little bit of something something to the sentiment. And now I'm going to start constructing the card. So I'll use my Tombow Mono liquid glue to attach the background to an A2 size card base. And in this bottle I have Ranger Multi Matte Medium, which is my adhesive of choice whenever I'm using Advellum like I did here. So I'm just putting the adhesive behind places where it won't be easily visible through the front when I attach it. And then I move on to gluing on the snowman, and the final phase will be adding some extra little embellishments with these Nuvo crystal drops. So I'll just go over the background in random places and even including the sentiment area and add some of these drops. And once I finish that, I'm using a gel pen to add some even smaller dots around those. So it looks like I have a snow flurry going on in the background, which I think is pretty fun, personally. Anyway, The last phase of this, after adding all these dots, will be to add the snowbank that I created and is now dried enough to add to the front of the card. So I'm going to add this liquid adhesive on the front because it's a nice strong adhesive from Tombow. And once that's adhered, that completes the card. Thanks for stopping by today. I appreciate it if you'll thumbs up this video and subscribe to my channel. Links to all the products used in this project are down below. Thanks again for visiting. I'll see you next time.